She wasn't expecting a miracle in the hospital hallway, but he was standing right in front of her, holding it in his eyes. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room flickered slightly, casting a harsh glow on the sterile white walls. Nora clutched her baby tighter against her chest, rocking gently as the soft wheeze of her daughter's breathing filled her ears like a slow ticking clock. Chloe had been sick for weeks now. Doctors called it complicated. Insurance called it uncovered. And Nora was running out of options and time. The room was full of rushing feet and shouted codes, but Nora felt utterly alone, until a voice, calm and clear, sliced through the noise like warm sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Ma'am, do you need help?" She turned to find a tall man in green scrubs kneeling beside her, his paramedic badge catching the light. His face was kind, worn slightly by years of crisis, but softened by a pair of eyes that weren't just looking at Chloe. They were seeing her. She can't breathe right," Nora stammered, fighting to hold back tears. "And I can't afford—" "You don't need to worry about that right now," he said gently. "Let's make sure she's okay first." His name was Ethan. She caught it on the small ID clipped to his uniform. He moved swiftly but with care, placing his stethoscope against Chloe's chest and calling for a nurse without a hint of panic. For the first time in days, Nora wasn't alone in her fear. As the staff whisked Chloe away for oxygen and tests, Ethan stayed with Nora. She noticed the way he kept glancing toward the pediatric wing, even though his shift seemed to be over. The moment could have ended there, a kind gesture from a stranger. But then he said something that surprised her. "I've seen kids like her get better, even when it seems impossible. Don't give up, okay?" Nora blinked, not sure whether the tears that rolled down her cheeks were from relief, exhaustion, or something else entirely. There was no reason for him to care, yet he did. And just like that, a thread was woven, small and fragile, between two strangers connected by a child's labored breath and an unspoken understanding. That night, as Chloe lay in a hospital crib hooked to monitors, Nora sat beside her and thought about Ethan. She didn't even know his last name, but somehow she knew this wasn't the last time she would see him. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks, just a warm cup of coffee and someone who remembers how you take it. The next morning, Nora sat by Chloe's hospital bed, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm paper cup of coffee she didn't remember buying. Sleep had been scarce, and hope even scarcer. But Chloe was stable, and for now that was enough. A quiet knock on the room's frame made her glance up. There he was again. Ethan, leaning slightly against the door, a fresh coffee in hand. "I took a guess. 2 sugars? No cream?" Nora blinked in surprise, her heart tugging unexpectedly at the small gesture. She nodded, her lips curving just slightly. "You guessed right." He stepped inside, careful to keep his distance, like he didn't want to intrude on something sacred. But his presence wasn't an intrusion. It was a relief. "I checked the chart," he said softly, setting the cup down. "She's responding well to the nebulizer. That's a good sign." "You didn't have to come back," she said, her voice edged with tired gratitude. "I know," he replied, shrugging slightly. "But I wanted to." It wasn't the words that hit her. It was the way he said them. No pity, no obligation, just honesty. Over the next few days, Ethan became a quiet fixture in their small corner of the hospital. He dropped by after his shifts with warm soup, gentle updates, or just a presence Nora didn't know she needed. They talked, not about grand things, but small ones. Her job at the diner she'd left behind, his training stories from EMT school, their mutual love for bad coffee and old movies. It was in these stolen moments that something fragile began to grow. Not the blinding heat of romance, but something slower, warmer, like sunlight creeping into a cold room. One night, Chloe stirred in her sleep, letting out a tiny cry. Nora rushed to her side, adjusting the blankets. Ethan stood behind her, hands in his pockets, watching with the kind of softness that made her throat tighten. "She's lucky," he said. Nora turned, surprised. "Lucky?" "To have you," he added, his voice low. "You haven't left her side once." Nora looked down at her daughter's sleeping face. "I'm all she has." Ethan paused, then replied, You're not alone, you know. Not anymore. The words hung between them like something too big to fully acknowledge. She didn't answer, and he didn't push. But in the quiet that followed, their bond deepened. Not in declarations, but in presence. That night, as Ethan left and Nora watched him disappear down the hall, she felt something shift inside her. Not certainty, but possibility. Not love exactly, not yet, but the space where love could live, if given the chance. She thought she was the only one carrying a heavy past, until she saw the scar he never meant to show. The days blended into each other like a watercolor sky. Soft edges, quiet shifts. Chloe was improving, little by little, her color returning, her tiny hands growing stronger. And with each breath she took, Nora found herself exhaling a little more too. Ethan had become part of the rhythm. He brought laughter to tense moments and silence that didn't need filling. But even in their growing closeness, there were things they hadn't said, shadows they hadn't touched. It was a Thursday evening when the first shadow slipped through. Nora had stepped outside for air, something she rarely allowed herself. The sun was setting, painting the hospital parking lot in hues of gold and rose. She wasn't alone long. Ethan joined her with two vending machine coffees in hand. "I think this qualifies as our second date," he joked, holding out the cup. She smiled, but it faded when she noticed the way his hand trembled slightly. Just a flicker, quickly hidden. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "Just long shift." He turned away, but not before the sleeve of his hoodie slid back slightly, revealing a pale scar snaking down his forearm. Faded, but unmistakable. Nora's eyes locked on it. "What happened?" she asked gently. He froze for half a second. Then with a sigh, he sat down on the concrete bench beside her. "Car crash," he said. 3 years ago, off duty. I wasn't the one who was supposed to live." His voice was flat, but his eyes were miles away. "I was driving. My brother was in the passenger seat. Drunk driver hit us head on." He paused, jaw tightening. "He didn't make it." Nora's breath caught. She reached for his hand without thinking. He didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "That's why I became a paramedic. I couldn't save him, but maybe I could save someone else." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them had changed. No longer casual, no longer safe. It was raw now, honest. "I haven't told that story in a long time," Ethan admitted. "Didn't think I'd want to." "And I haven't told you mine," Nora said quietly. He turned to her. "Chloe's dad left before she was born. I waited tables through my pregnancy, sold my car to pay rent, begged hospitals for care she couldn't get." She looked away. "Sometimes I wonder if I failed her before she even had a chance." Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. "You didn't fail her," he said. "You fought for her. You still are." In that moment, their truth sat between them like twin anchors, not heavy with regret, but grounded in something real, something shared. They weren't just two people thrown together by circumstance. They were two souls scarred by loss, bound by love, for a child, for redemption, maybe even for each other. Neither said the word out loud, but both knew now. This wasn't just connection. This was beginning to look like fate. Just when everything felt right, the past came knocking, and this time, it demanded to be answered. The hospital had become a second home, not by choice, but by necessity. Chloe's recovery was steady but fragile, and Nora had learned to live in the in-between, between monitors and hope, between coffee breaks with Ethan and the fear of what came next. And yet those moments with him were starting to feel like more. More than support, more than coincidence, more than just a kind man helping a desperate woman. But love, real love, has a way of attracting storms. It happened on a Tuesday. Nora was packing up the little things Chloe liked. Her stuffed giraffe, a storybook Ethan had brought her, when her phone buzzed. A name she hadn't seen in over 2 years flashed on the screen. Derek, Chloe's father. Her heart sank. She let it ring. Later that day, Ethan found her outside, arms crossed tight, staring off at nothing. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Part of her wanted to lie. But that wasn't what they did anymore. Chloe's father called, she said flatly, out of nowhere. Said he heard she was sick, wants to talk. Ethan's expression shifted, careful, guarded. What do you want to do? I don't know, Nora admitted. Part of me wants to scream at him. Another part wonders if he might fight for custody just to play hero. The law doesn't care who actually raised her. Ethan sat down beside her. Do you think he's capable of that? She looked at him, tears threatening. I don't know what he's capable of anymore. There was silence. And then Ethan said the one thing she hadn't expected. Maybe it's time you fought back. She turned sharply. What? You've done everything on your own for so long, Nora. Maybe it's time you stop running from the past and start facing it. You're stronger than you think. But his words, meant to empower, felt like a push she wasn't ready for. So that's your advice? Fight him? Drag my daughter through court? After everything she's been through? Ethan's face tightened. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying you're not powerless. She stood up abruptly. You don't get to tell me how to protect my daughter. You don't know what it's like. The words stung as soon as they left her lips. But they were out now, and Ethan stood too, his voice steady but his eyes hurt. You're right, he said. I don't. But I do know what it's like to lose someone because you waited too long to act. Then he walked away, and just like that, the warmth between them fractured. Inside, Chloe slept peacefully, but outside her door, two people who had started to feel whole again now stood on opposite sides of something neither had wanted, a choice neither had asked for. And love, once growing quietly in shared spaces, now waited in silence, unsure whether it had come too late. She thought she was doing the right thing, until the silence between them started to feel heavier than the fear itself. The days that followed were colder, even though the weather hadn't changed. Ethan didn't come by like he used to. The empty seat beside her in Chloe's room stayed empty. The coffee he used to bring? Just a ghost of routine. Nora told herself it was better this way. After all, wasn't this what she had trained herself for? Surviving without help, choosing caution over closeness, keeping her daughter safe no matter the cost. And yet, every time she reached for her phone, she felt the weight of his absence. She hadn't told Ethan that Derek had shown up. 2 days after the call, he appeared at the hospital, unshaven, anxious, holding a stuffed animal like a peace offering. He didn't step into the room. He only asked to see Chloe from the doorway. Nora let him, not because she trusted him, but because she needed to know what she was up against. I'm not the same guy, he said. I want to help. She didn't reply. Now alone in the room, Nora stared at Chloe's tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. How had everything become so complicated again? Her daughter needed peace, stability, not courtroom battles and emotional whiplash, and certainly not a mother who couldn't even figure out her own heart. Ethan had been the first person to look at her like she wasn't broken. He didn't pity her. He saw her. So why did she push him away? The door creaked, and for a moment her heart skipped. But it wasn't him, just a nurse. When night fell, Nora finally stepped out into the quiet hallway. She pulled out her phone, stared at Ethan's name in her messages. She typed, I miss you. Then she deleted it. Instead, she typed, I'm sorry. Then she deleted that too. Instead, she slid the phone back into her pocket and sat on the bench outside Chloe's room. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from something far more fragile. Doubt. Not just about Derek, or custody, or the system, but about herself. Could she really open herself to someone? Could she trust someone to stay after a life full of people who had left? Ethan wasn't perfect, but he had shown up again and again, and she had turned him away when he had simply reminded her she had power. Now she wasn't sure if she'd get the chance to take those words back. And in that long, quiet night, Nora finally admitted what she hadn't before. She wasn't afraid of Derek. She wasn't afraid of losing custody. She was afraid of loving someone again, and losing that too. She didn't expect to see him again, but sometimes love circles back. Not because you call it, but because it refuses to leave. The next morning was unusually quiet. Chloe was breathing easier. The machines that once beeped like ticking bombs now hummed softly, rhythmically, almost like a lullaby. The crisis had passed, but the ache inside Nora hadn't. She sipped her coffee alone, the bitter taste grounding her in a reality she didn't want to stay in for long. Then, just past sunrise, she heard it, a soft knock on the open doorway. Her heart stuttered before she even turned. It was him. Ethan stood there, a paper bag in one hand and something unreadable in his eyes. He didn't step inside. Not yet. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," he said quietly. Nora stood slowly. "I didn't know if you'd come." They looked at each other. Two people who had once been comfort now turned cautious. "I brought muffins," he added, holding up the bag like a peace offering. "Not the vending machine kind." She almost smiled. Almost. "I'm sorry," she said first, "for snapping, for pushing you away." He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a scared animal. "You were scared. I get it." "I'm still scared," she admitted, voice trembling. "But not of Derek. Not even of losing Chloe. I'm scared of letting someone care about us. And then losing that too." Ethan set the bag down gently on the table. "I know what it's like to lose someone you love. And I also know sometimes we protect ourselves so hard, we lock out the very things that could save us." Nora swallowed hard. "Are we one of those things?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small origami crane, made from a hospital menu. "I made this last night," he said. "It's stupid. But my mom used to tell me cranes were for healing. So," he placed it gently in her palm, "even if we don't know what this is yet, I'd like to keep showing up. Not just for Chloe, for you." Nora's fingers closed around the crane. She didn't know what tomorrow would look like, whether Derek would fight or fade away, whether life would grant them peace or more storms. But in that moment, something in her shifted. Hope didn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it came in the form of a wrinkled paper crane and a man brave enough to return even after being pushed away. She looked up at him, her eyes glassy but clear. "Then stay. Just stay." Ethan nodded. "I was already on my way back." And just like that, the light began to return. Not all at once, but enough to see that the path forward wasn't as dark as she'd feared. In a world full of broken promises, his was quiet, but it held more weight than anything she'd ever been told. The days that followed were different. Not easier. Hospital life rarely allowed that. But lighter. Chloe laughed for the first time in weeks, a tiny sound that filled the sterile room with warmth. She held on to Ethan's finger when he came in, like she remembered him, trusted him, and Nora let herself breathe again. Not just for Chloe, but for herself. One evening, as the sky turned indigo and the nurses dimmed the hallway lights, Nora and Ethan sat together by Chloe's bedside. The little girl was asleep, a cartoon playing silently on the screen above. "I don't think I've ever been this tired," Nora whispered, leaning her head against the chair. Ethan smiled gently. "You've been carrying the world for a long time." She looked at him. "And now?" He didn't flinch. "Now you don't have to carry it alone." Those words hung in the air like soft bells in winter, quiet but impossible to ignore. "I used to think letting someone in would make me weaker," she said. "That if I counted on someone and they left, it would break me." Ethan reached out, his hand finding hers. "I'm not going anywhere, Nora." "You don't have to promise that," she said. "You've already done more than—" "I want to promise it," he interrupted, his voice calm but certain. "Not because I'm trying to be a hero, because I care about you, both of you, and I'm not here to rescue you. I'm here to be with you, through whatever comes." Nora looked at him, her chest tightening with something she hadn't felt in years. Trust. Real, terrifying, beautiful trust. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. He smiled. "Neither do I, but I know one thing." She raised an eyebrow. "What?" "That I want to be the one beside you when you find out." A tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Relief, belonging. "You know," she said softly, If someone had told me a month ago that a stranger with a messy haircut and vending machine coffee would turn out to be the safest place I'd ever known, he chuckled. Pretty sure I paid $6 for that haircut. She laughed and he kissed her knuckles. Not passionately, not theatrically, just with quiet certainty, like a man making a vow. They didn't say I love you that night. Some promises don't need to be spoken aloud. But as they sat together under the dim hospital light, the promise was made. He would stay. She would let him. And together they would fight for something better. Not just for Chloe, but for themselves. Sometimes happiness sneaks in when you least expect it, like laughter on a rainy day or a smile that breaks through the darkest clouds. The rain was steady that afternoon, tapping gently against the hospital windows like a soft drum beat. Nora watched it for a moment, her fingers tracing the outline of Chloe's tiny hand in hers. The tension that had gripped her for weeks seemed to loosen, just a little. The future was still uncertain. Derek's looming presence hadn't faded, but for the first time in a long time, there was something else filling the spaces between. Something lighter. Ethan arrived just as the sun peeked through the clouds, shaking droplets from his coat. He carried an umbrella, but more importantly, he carried a smile. That easy, crooked smile that had begun to feel like home. I thought you might need this, he said, holding out the umbrella with a playful grin. Nora laughed, the sound unexpected and warm. Since when do you carry an umbrella? Since I realized you didn't. They stood together, watching Chloe nap peacefully in her hospital crib, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, a steady rhythm of hope. Then, as if on cue, Chloe stirred. Her eyes fluttered open and met Ethan's with a sleepy smile that melted Nora's heart. Hey, little one, Ethan whispered, leaning close. Chloe reached out and grasped his finger, her grip surprisingly strong. Nora felt a rush of something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. Joy. It wasn't the kind of joy that comes from grand moments or sweeping gestures. It was quiet and simple, like the feeling of warm sunlight on cold skin. They spent the afternoon sharing stories and laughter, the hospital room filled with a soft, healing energy. Outside, the rain stopped, and a rainbow arched across the sky, a promise painted in colors. In that moment, Nora realized that even in the darkest storms, unexpected joy could find a way in. Through a child's smile, a stranger's kindness, and the fragile, beautiful hope of a new beginning. Love is not just about moments of joy. It's about weathering storms that stretch patience, break spirits, and demand everything you have. Weeks turned into months. The hospital became less of a home and more of a memory as Chloe grew stronger, her laughter echoing beyond the walls that once held so much fear. But healing, like love, is never a straight path. Derek's presence remained a shadow at the edge of their fragile peace. Legal battles tested Nora's strength in ways no sickness ever had. Courtrooms, lawyers, and endless paperwork threatened to overwhelm her, pulling her into a war she had never wanted. Ethan stood by her side through it all, a quiet rock amid the chaos. He juggled night shifts and hospital visits, never letting Nora face a moment alone. But even he felt the strain. There were nights when exhaustion frayed their patience. Arguments sparked over misunderstandings, small frustrations swelling into storms. One evening, after a particularly grueling court session, Nora returned home to find Ethan waiting with a tired smile. We're doing the best we can, he said, pulling her into a hug. She leaned against him, tears slipping free. What if it's not enough? He shook his head. It is enough because we're together. Their love was tested by time, by hardship, by the weight of their pasts and the uncertainty of their future. Yet in every challenge, they found reasons to hold on, to believe. Because love, real love, is not just about the good times. It's about fighting through the bad ones, together. Sometimes the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another, a chance to heal, to grow, and to step boldly into the unknown. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the small apartment that Nora now called home. Chloe giggled in her playpen, her energy boundless and bright, a testament to how far they had all come. Nora stood by the window, sipping her coffee and breathing in the fresh start that hung in the air like a promise. The legal battles were behind her, and Derek's attempts to disrupt their lives had faded into distant memories. Ethan entered quietly, a stack of papers in his hands. A new job offer, one that meant less time away and more moments shared. He smiled as he watched Nora and Chloe together. "This," he said, nodding toward the happy scene, "is what all the fighting was for." Nora smiled back, feeling the tight knot of worry inside her finally begin to unravel. They had faced the storm, survived the doubts, and now stood on the other side, together. With a hand in his and Chloe's, laughter filling the room, they stepped forward into a new beginning. Not perfect, not certain, but theirs, filled with hope, love, and the quiet strength of a family forged through fire. Love's greatest test is when it asks for everything, even the parts of ourselves we never thought we could give. The sun was setting in a sky painted with streaks of orange and purple when the emergency call came in. Ethan's pager buzzed sharply against the quiet evening. Without hesitation, he grabbed his gear and rushed out, leaving Nora and Chloe behind. She watched the door close, a familiar ache settling in her chest. This was the life he had chosen, to save others, sometimes at great personal cost. Hours passed with Nora sitting by the window, listening to the steady rhythm of Chloe's breathing, waiting for Ethan's return. Then the knock came. Not the confident, strong knock she was used to, but a hesitant one. Ethan stepped inside, his face pale, a hospital ID badge clutched tightly in his hand. "I was on a call," he began, voice heavy. "There was an accident. A child not much older than Chloe. I did everything I could, but..." Tears welled in Nora's eyes before he could finish. Ethan took a deep breath. "It made me realize how precious every moment with you and Chloe is. I can't promise I won't have to leave again, but I can promise that no matter what, I'll always come back." Nora reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We've already given so much," she said softly. "But love means sacrifice, and I'm ready to face it with you." In that quiet room, under fading light, they understood the depth of what they shared. A bond that demanded courage, strength, and sometimes the ultimate sacrifice. When every broken thread is woven back together, a new melody rises, one of peace, love, and the dreams we dared to hold on to. The hospital room was quiet, filled only with soft whispers of hope and healing. Chloe, now stronger and full of life, smiled up at Nora and Ethan as they sat close, hands entwined. Years of pain, struggle, and sacrifice had brought them here, to a place where peace wasn't just a distant dream, but a tangible reality. Nora looked at Ethan, her heart swelling with gratitude. The man who had once been a stranger had become her anchor, her partner, her home. They had weathered storms together, loss, doubt, fear, and emerged stronger, bound not just by love, but by shared strength and unwavering commitment. Ethan brushed a stray curl from Chloe's forehead and smiled softly. "We did it. Together." Nora nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "This is just the beginning." Outside, the sun rose, casting golden light that spilled through the windows, filling the room with warmth. In that final harmony, where past wounds met future hope, they found a love that could heal, a family that could thrive, and a life worth fighting for.